Alright everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we have another video on race realism. Someone wanted me to react to this video. This is probably the last one I'm going to do on race realism just because it's kind of a joke of a topic. And, I've debated a few people on it. I'm open to debate anyone who wants to talk about it, but frankly, making videos over and over again on it is kind of annoying. Just because the same mistakes are made every time. A lot of the people who promulgate this idea, they just don't know anything about philosophy. And because they don't know anything about philosophy, they can't present a coherent defense of this, honestly indefensible position. But still, if I were to, become a race realist, I could present an actual, I think, coherent case. Now, it would require abandoning race realism as they understand it. But, these people are just remarkably bad at it. Every video, they make the same mistakes. I'm not going to watch this entire video. It's 15 minutes. That would make probably like 30 minutes plus of content. Or not really content, but of the video. The video would be over 30 minutes because I pause a lot. But we're going to watch his intro. We're going to watch a little bit of the race as a social construct. And then we'll look at some of these objections. I didn't look at most of this stuff because it gets into like judicial and social consequences. I'm sure he's talking about of like, I guess in his mind pretending that race isn't real. I'm not sure. It's just doesn't seem to be as relevant as what I saw, which were basic mistakes. His definition collapses in on itself, you'll see, and it's untenable. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Let's hear it. And by the way, I don't really know who this guy is. Someone just told me to react to him, so.
Race realism is the position that race is a biological reality, not a social construct.
Okay, so that's the position. That race is a biological reality, not a social construct. Now, let's understand the definition before we move on, because he skips past it really fast. Race is a biological reality. I'm not really sure what that means, but he goes on to say that it's not a social construct. There we have something that we can latch onto, because we understand race to be a category. And we also understand categories to be a collection of things, right? If you take like set theory, you would say that a set is a collection of things. A category, similarly, is a collection of things. Now, these collections of things must be collected by something, and the perceiver is the one that collects them and organizes them and applies linguistic superimposition such that we get the category of white, the category of black, the category of man, the category of woman, what have you. And as such, these can be nothing other than social constructs, because they are linguistic superimpositions. They are words. They are words that group and capture data that we are exposed to. That data sometimes is biological, sometimes it's social, sometimes it's environmental. But regardless, it is data being grouped by perceivers. So right at the beginning, we have so many issues. We're told that this thing is a biological reality and not a social construct. I guess I take a biological reality to be something like the heart, the underlying physical reality of a heart exists. It's a biological reality. But if someone were to ask me, is the concept of the heart, is that a biological? Obviously not. Obviously that's a mental concept. It's a construct. So race, a category, clearly can't be the former. It can't be referring to anything underlying. It has to be referring to the net, which is the thing that is capturing underlying realities or disrealities. And so it clearly is not a biological reality. It's a category, and it's a construct. And this is the boring thing with race realists, is that they just can't understand this. Like, just say, yeah, it's a social construct, but it captures realities that are all genetically and causatively related to the foregoing categories, such that every feature of whiteness comes as a consequence of genes that are captured in the category of whiteness. Do something like that would be at least a little bit more interesting, because then we could get on and talk about, what these things are. But when you say that a category is a biological reality, I just think you're philosophically inept. But let's keep going. And by the way, a social construct, he's going to use this definition later on, but a social construct is any category or thing that is made real by convention or collective agreement. Clearly, the category, any category or thing, remember, clearly the category of race is made real by convention or collective agreement. And there is an objection that he brings up. he does a terrible response to it, and we'll get into that. But the objection is actually correct in that the category of race has morphed over time to such a degree as to be presenting contradictory definitions. And as such, it's clear that race is made real, quote unquote, by convention or collective agreement. One more reason that we know that this is true: if there were no human minds, if the English language or any language didn't exist, if we were but meat machines walking around, if consciousness was evaporated from the very fabric of reality, would whiteness as the category, would the category of whiteness exist? Obviously not. And as such, we know then that because the category itself is real, we know then that it must be made real by convention or collective agreement, and then we know that it is definitionally a social construct. And so, I mean, it's just, when I watch these videos, I'm like, man, this is terrible. Like, get me in a voice call with these people. They're going to be admitting it's a social construct within 10 minutes, just like every other person.
The foundation of race realism is not ideology nor even science, but direct observation.
And then it gets even more ludicrous. He says that it's not ideology that... let's get his exact words, because I want to hear the beginning.
Race is a biological reality, not a social construct. The foundation of race realism...
The foundation of race realism...
is not ideology...
It's not ideology...
nor even science...
nor science...
but direct observation.
But direct observation. So, in your definition, you appeal to science, biology. But then you say that it's not science, it's observation. Well, guess what? Biology and science in general often contradict observation. So you either ally yourself with science or you ally yourself with observation. Now, I actually agree with you that a lot of the times race is understood observationally and not genetically. A good piece of evidence for this is that people like Nick Fuentes are taken to be white when he's 21% non-white. These people love to bring up PCA maps. If you were to put or plot Nick Fuentes on there, he's not going to be grouped with Europeans, and yet he is considered white because it's a social category, a social construct made real by convention or agreement and referenced only to observation, just like this guy admits here. So your definition, this is why it's collapsing, your definition refers to science and then says it's actually not science but observation that is the foundation upon which race realism rests. Well, guess what? Flat eartherism often rests upon observation as the key base upon which the ideology is constructed, upon which the superstructure rests. Things look flat. They don't look spherical. And so, in terms of like the globe, the planet. And so it's easy to say, well, the earth is flat. When we go by observation, we get a lot of sort of wacky, weird conclusions. So basing something on observations is very, very strange, because now we're saying that it's actually not genetics, because we know that people with the similar genetics can have varying phenotypical characteristics. Take, for example, mixed people who, one can come out looking brown, one can come out looking white. And I guess one is white now because observationally speaking, they're going to be grouped with whites. But genetically speaking, those two would actually form a cluster together. It's so odd. It's so odd because we're not mapping onto actual lines in the sand, in the biological sand. We're mapping onto what this guy admits is mere observation. Which, it's funny, actually, when I argue with other race realists, I say this. I say that we made race on the basis of the easiest to see characteristic, and they're like, no, it's genetics. No, it's not. Just like this guy admits, observation is actually where it comes from.
Long before they acquire language, children perceive racial differences without being instructed to do so. As they mature, children begin to associate these physical differences with behavioral patterns. We observe racial differences prior to language, prior to politics, prior to...
What did he even just say? Hold on.
Patterns. As they mature, children begin to associate these physical differences with behavioral patterns.
Where is your evidence for that claim? You're claiming to know a child's mind. We know that children associate physical characteristics with behavioral outputs. That seems like an absurdly hard claim to prove, and I don't think that he can. I think that is just a baseless assertion. I mean, it wouldn't actually further the race realist position. I went back just because of how absurd of a claim that is.
We observe racial differences prior to language, prior to politics, prior to ideology, and prior to science. Science does not generate, but confirm.
And that, again, like, dude, these people are so philosophically inept. We observe this prior to ideology. Observation is filtered through our ideological presuppositions that furnish the way in which we experience reality. This is understood by people as far, just go listen to Jay Dyer and he's going to harp on how, observation itself rests on presuppositions which form a worldview. That is true, though. That is what Hume and Kant point out in the modern period. And so even a statement like that is just as stupid as the rest of this. How anyone takes this serious, I don't know.
What observation already tells us. Disciplines like genetics, cranial morphometry, endocrinology,
big words means I'm right,
and psychometrics confirm that our intuitive distinctions track biologically meaningful patterns. Race realism, therefore.
Now look at this. Now we're going back onto science. When I just gave examples, I know he can't hear me, obviously, but I just gave, for the audience, I just gave examples where no, our observation doesn't track biologically meaningful patterns, because you can have two people with a similar genetic makeup, if they're of mixed ancestry, for example, but they'll come out looking completely different. And because they'll come out looking completely different, our observations will group them erroneously. So no, this isn't true. And I just already know, I can see the comments. Some idiot's going to be like, just because the boundary is blurry, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the category itself, when it is resting upon observational data, runs into errors with reference to biological patterns, meaning that we either have to ally ourselves with biological patterns or with observational patterns. Race, people who are obsessed with race, they go with observational patterns. But then race realism, as defined with reference to biology, doesn't make any sense. If we're going to do race realism, then we need to find the cleanest biological divisions, which is going to inspire a ton of debate because it doesn't even make any sense. How far are we going to zoom in on our grouping? How, wide are we going to make the grouping? How narrow are we going to make the grouping, for example? But the main point here is basically just that, no, you can't have it. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're either going off observation or you're going off science. And he has made it clear he's going off observation.
Our intuitive distinctions track biologically meaningful patterns. Race realism, therefore, is not a hypothesis awaiting proof, but an empirical generalization resisting disproof. The social construct thesis, by contrast, fails the test of empirical adequacy as it denies
empirical adequacy. The social construct theory, which says that a category is socially constructed. What empirical evidence would we have to say that a category is not socially constructed? How inept are you? Categories are always socially constructed. They don't exist. Do you think categories just exist? If we didn't exist, things would be just grouped. These are red things and these are blue things. Obviously not. So what kind of statement even is that?
Is that which is directly observed and statistically consistent. A social construct is a collectively maintained category or thing that is made real by convention.
And then this is the definition I use, just so everyone knows we're operating under the same definitions.
Or collective agreement. Examples include money, a symbolic medium of exchange that holds value.
And I like how he uses these as examples of social constructs, like the most socially constructed thing.
Only because...
and you'll see why it's dishonest. Look what he does right after.
Institutions enforce...
he's going to say, well, race isn't like these extremely socially constructed things, which actually have no tethering to reality. So therefore, it must be, I guess, biological, nonsensical.
And
that's just fallacious.
Individuals accept its worth, and traffic rules, which are arbitrary coordination systems, like driving on the right or the left side of the road. Race is not like these. Race is a biological reality.
Okay, so it's not like that, therefore it's a biological reality. Good logic. False dichotomy.
That arose from evolutionary pressures long before human societies, languages, or institutional conventions existed.
Okay. Let's go to the objections, because that is... I guess we can watch the races. Let me speed it up, because I'm already going a little bit long.
In fact, rather than race being a social construct, it is far more accurate to say that society is a product of race. To say race is a social construct...
society is a product of race. So, then where is white society? What is white society? Why is there such a diversity amongst European societies? And there always have been. If you look at the northern European peoples, traditionally, historically, they have been more decentralized. They have been more tribal. This is why Romans considered them to be barbarians. They were less hierarchical, less orderly, you could say. Whereas the Southern Europeans were more hierarchical, they were more centralized. This is where you get the Roman Empire. This is where Catholicism will ultimately take hold. And one of the things that a lot of the Romans talked about was the reason why they said the Northern European peoples would never have society is because they can't submit to hierarchy. They can't have this sort of centralization. And then you see even the Anglo societies that did end up taking hold, guess what? They're decentralized in the same manner as they were before. And you have this liberal individualism, which has taken such a foothold. And so if we were to say that society comes from race, we wouldn't expect to see these divergences unless race itself is a category which doesn't capture the biological realities that you're attempting to. It seems to me that there are real divisions that are giving rise to contradictory natures within the categories themselves, rendering the categories superfluous, rendering them not only superfluous but contradictory to the nature of the project which you're setting out to do, because you're attempting to group like with like, but you're grouping like and unlike.
Is to invert cause and effect, like saying clay is a sculpture. Races are different because they evolved by
even look at these maps. Does this look like the map of the races of the world? It doesn't to me.
Divergent evolutionary paths. These involved lengthy geographic isolation, different environmental selection pressure.
Or this one. If this is the case, why are we grouping people from, if you look at the maps, we're grouping Spanish people with Swedish people, but clearly they're not in the same environmental pressures, so why are we doing this? There's no logic. It doesn't make any sense. Even if I were to take their erroneous presupposed notions, it wouldn't make any sense. We would need to make the racial, we're putting Russians with the other Northern Europeans. Spanish looks like they're going to be grouped with some of these Northern Africans. Italian, similar case. And so these divisions that exist within the races appear to me to be so stark as to give rise to not subcategories, but differing categories.
And differential social and sexual selection. We observe racial differences across several domains, including...
And by the way, the entire point of me saying that is that it's arguable. Because it's arguable, clearly these hard... Sorry about that. Had something in my face. It was a hair or something. But what was I saying? The point of that, to say that it's arguable, is to show why and how these racial lines morph, and to provide even more evidence in favor of the fact that they are really just arbitrary lines drawn that may capture things that are real, but that ultimately are constructed.
Morphological differences in cranial shape and volume, skin pigmentation, facial features, and hair texture and density, cognitive differences in general intelligence, working memory, neural connectivity patterns.
I also like how the presupposition here, without proving it, is that these things are racially determined. That's the presupposition. Why don't you actually make the argument for general intelligence being causatively related to race? I notice that's not what you're doing. You just presuppose it like you're doing everything else because you're a dishonest, bad faith actor who wants to present this worldview as though it's uncontroversial when it's completely controversial. The fact of the matter is, again, this is another objection that he brings up, but it's nice to preempt your objections without actually, countering them, because then it makes it seem like you can dismiss them. But the reality is you can't dismiss the fact that modern geneticists do consider race to be a social construct. So I guess they are wrong and you are right, which is nice. We love anti-intellectualism. At least people on the right do.
Time preference and moral intuitions, and behavioral differences in aggression and impulsivity, conscientiousness, parental investment and nurturing, truthfulness, inventiveness, and cooperation.
Look at this. Again, each one of these things, inventiveness. Like, I could pick out any one of these and talk about, I've talked about this before. If we talk about the inventiveness, the upward spiral, as Paul Kennedy calls it, that the European peoples experienced, to say that that was necessary or rooted in genetics is to ignore the fact that, as he states in the, at the end of the 15th century, it was anyone's guess as to who was going to rise. There was competition between the states. They were similarly developed. In fact, people like the Chinese had printing hundreds of years before the Europeans. The Ottoman Empire and these other power centers were similarly advanced. And so to claim as though this is like a racial thing is just to presuppose your entire argument. It's begging the question, which is what this entire video is doing, on top of presenting self-defeating definitions.
People assume interracial differences are due primarily to differences in culture, but culture is not so much the origin of difference as an outcome. Specifically, culture reflects 1. The policies of a society's elites, and 2. The underlying biological traits of the population. In this sense, culture is an extended phenotype. So let's clarify the causal sequence. First, ecological selection pressures shaped population-specific gene pools. Genes influence developmental trajectory, including the structure of the brain. Neural architecture shapes cognition and cognition and temperament shape behavior. Therefore,
look at all these presuppositions. Like, this guy just solved the philosophy of mind. Behavior, as instantiated to the medium of consciousness, comes from your cognition and your temperament. Like, that is hotly debated. What are you utilizing to sustain this argument other than a bunch of presuppositions? Somehow you're uniting, naturalist scientific epistemology with a complete reliance on observation. These things are not even internally consistent.
Thought and behavior are largely constrained by biology. Of course, culture does exert a recursive influence, but all traits are influenced by genetics. A key variable here is neoteny, the retention of juvenile.
Okay, let's go on to the objections. That way we can end this video off. Because many of these objections, some of them actually are the ones that I wouldn't make some of these objections to race realism. Like, I wouldn't talk about abuse, I don't think. If it's true, it's true, But
a common objection to race realism is that racial categories cannot be biologically real because they vary across.
So this isn't really the objection that I make. It's similar. I've said something like this before. My objection would be that racial categories cannot be biologically real because categories are not biological things. They're linguistic superimpositions. And so definitionally, they're not the aforementioned. But I understand what this objection is saying, and it's a good objection. It's saying that racial categories have been different to the point where they were actually contradictory, and as such, unless rapid evolution took place, or unless these categories are so meaningless as to flip-flop every 10 years, it seems to be the case, or at least we have evidence to believe that these things are more constructed on the basis of societal pressures, the beliefs of those people around us, our own presuppositions regarding peoples from various places, and not biology or genetics.
Cultures and historical periods. This
Let's hear how he debunks this.
reasoning assumes that for categories to be meaningful, they must be fixed, universal, and perfectly delineated. But
no, it doesn't. It doesn't assume that they must be fixed, universal, and perfectly delineated. Guess what? Again, this guy with the false dichotomy. There's a big difference between being fixed, universal, and perfectly delineated and completely amorphous and encompassing anything that you want it to be at any time, which is what you get when you have such varying definitions of white as to have some people promulgating definitions which include the English and German Saxons and others which include Turkish people. Clearly, the attempted rebuttal here doesn't work because no one is saying they must be fixed, universal, and perfectly delineated. We're just saying that there needs to be a modicum of consistency, of which there is not. So this rebuttal just completely falls on its face.
this is a category error. Taxonomies are tools for tracking regularities, not Platonic ideals. For example, a person with a white mother and a black father is biologically 50% of each ancestry. Whether such a person is socially categorized as black, as in the United States, or mixed, as in Brazil, is culturally variable, but it does not alter the underlying biological fact.
And I'm just reading his next part. He said, this objection confuses semantic variance in classification with the ontological status of the phenomenon. The ontology of race, as stated by this guy, is determined on the basis of observational data. And so the semantic application, the language, the meanings of the words which we ascribe on the basis of the observations that we make are the defining features of the ontology of that very thing. So that doesn't even make any sense. The only way that statement that he made would make sense is if you say that the ontology is defined, the being, the essence of race is actually defined genetically. Then you could say our semantics don't really matter. What matters is the essence of the phenomenon. But the essence, as stated earlier, is defined on the basis of our observation. He really fucked himself by saying that we define race by observation. That is one of the reasons all of this falls apart. So, this is just embarrassing. So let's keep going.
Another objection claims that because...
This is the continuum objection. Human traits vary along a continuum. Therefore, I wouldn't make this objection. That's, this... So I'm going to skip that because I wouldn't make that objection to race realism. Abuse, I wouldn't make that either. Silence of science, I wouldn't make this objection either. Let's see, contemporary science has refuted the concept of race. That doesn't even make any sense. Even his straw man objections don't even make any sense. Science can't refute a concept. necessarily, because concepts are not always tied down into empirical realities. Concepts, like science, is not going to refute the existence of the concept of a triangle. So that doesn't even make any sense. And then it looks like, what does it get into next?
Error, just as any bridge built on false measurements will collapse. Groups cannot.
Job market when two groups significantly different IQs. Legal. Multiracial societies destroy the function of the jury system. So it looks like we're not really talking about race realism anymore, but like multiracialism. If you can let me know in the comments if there was anything, grand that I missed, but it's been a minute and we already got through his definition, why it doesn't work, why race realism fails under his own definitions and his own basis of discernment, which is observation. So, sorry. I'm going to leave that there. If you guys have any questions, whatever, comments, concerns, criticisms, leave them in the comments below. Like, subscribe. If you want to debate, hit me up. X, Veritable C on X, Discord, Veritable Crusader. That being said, that's that. See ya.